Hi, I'm Femi Okay.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. It's our last day in Doha.
Today, an intimate look at the life of Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. Our colleague Steve Chow from 101 East is with us to share his travels with Duterte. He had rare access to the Philippine leader who took power in June.
So how will Duterte's controversial foreign policies and personality affect life in the Philippines? You don't want to miss today's show.
Some would say your actions aren't becoming of a statesman.
I never went to a school called the Academy for Statesmen. I am not a statesman. I do not aspire to be one. I just would like to be an ordinary president who can you if you with my...
The Philippine president rose to power on the wave of an anti-establishment backlash. Duterte has encouraged a campaign that's killed some 3,000 people suspected of ties to the drug trade.
He's always a colorful character to discuss. So with us to do just that, Aries Arugay, a political scientist at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Rhonda Ramiro, Vice Chair of Bayan USA. That's an alliance of 20 progressive Filipino groups in the United States. And, of course, here with us in Doha, Steve Chow, senior presenter for Al Jazeera English's 101 East. His film, Duterte, A President's Report Card, premieres on Al Jazeera English at 22:30 GMT. You can watch it online at aljazeera.com.
Steve, so this is your second film with Duterte. What made you go back for more?
Number one, the fact that a candidate that was fourth in the polls when we first did our first film with him, amazingly rose to the top and became president of the Philippines. It's an incredible story. A long shot person outside of the political sort of dynasties that have ruled the country, coming in and getting the popular support and winning a landslide victory. So we had to go back. And he welcomed us with open arms and open doors.
Was he expecting to win?
That's a question we put to him, and he's sort of given us two answers, as he often does. At first he said, you know what, of course I did. And then at other times he's like, you know, I'm surprised I won. So it's sometimes hard to get the real answer out of him. But one thing is clear is that he is pushing through with all the policies that he promised he would do in his campaigning.
Wow.
So hard to get the real answer out of him. Knowing that, this might be hard to answer, but this is Nicolo, because our community had lots of questions for what it was like to meet him, to spend so much time with him. Nicolo on Twitter says, what was it like being with him? His normal routine and his work ethic, and how does he keep away from all the stress?
That's a very good question. I'll answer the last question first. How does he get away with all the stress? He loves, like many Filipinos, to karaoke. So, you know, in our first film, we were at his bar after dark in Davao. In the second film...
You mean his bar? Does he own a bar?
He actually owns a bar in Davao. And in the past, it was open to the public. But now that he's president, the public security has said, sorry, this is now a private bar. So we went with him the second time, now as president. And the people he sang to were his public security guards. So does he sing well? Well, you know, our cameraman is a professional singer. He has his own band. And he was somewhat cringing. So I'd say A for effort for Duterte for, you know, singing and getting on stage, but he might be a little bit challenged on that front.
Let me just bring in Aries into the conversation. Aries, Duterte is somebody who's got a public image, and Steve kind of went behind that image to find out what the man was really like. From his public image, how do you see him?
Well, this is a president, the first president in Mindanao, that is well received throughout the country and across social classes. It's unprecedented in a way, and that's why when media portrays him more as a populist, it tends me to think about what really populism is when you have a president that's not only supported by different parts of the country, but also by different social classes. Populist leaders tends to get their support mostly from the poor. But in terms of Duterte, he gets support from the middle classes and the upper classes as well. One thing in the public is that he's a guy that keeps on working. We have never seen presidents that seem to, it's like he's always in his last day in office. And I think that sends a good signal to Filipinos that if politicians were working as this hard, then maybe good things could come out of politics and governance.
And I'd say that what Aries is talking about is sort of the overall sentiment in the Philippines. You know, Rodrigo Duterte has an 86% approval rating. He is loved by so many
That's
Filipinos.
Extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. Probably no one in recent memory in terms of leadership in the Philippines has enjoyed such, or anywhere else in the world, has enjoyed such a high popularity rating. And I think that he comes at a time where in the Philippines and perhaps around the world, people are very frustrated with the political institutions and the idea that slick politicians always tell and promise people the world but deliver very little. And here's a man that for 20 years was a mayor of a city and he turned around the city from being one of the most dangerous to one of the safest. And people in the rest of the Philippines says, hey, we want a bit of that, even though it might mean that people will die on the streets due to his war on drugs.
Malika, can I just sneak in one of Steve's pictures?
Please,
Because
yeah.
Steve, as you've been going around reporting on this second film with Duterte, you've been taking photographs. This one, it speaks to his connection with the people. Tell us what's going on here. This is one of your pictures.
Correct, very much so. This was Rodrigo Duterte going to visit some police in Cagayan de Oro, one of the cities in the south, where he's extremely, extremely popular. Everywhere he goes, actually. You see women cooing over him, giddy over him, and people just say, we love you, you know, mayor, you know, or president, you know, all these titles that he has. And he is literally swamped by Filipinos.
I would say one of the reasons we're hearing from people online for why that is, this is Jag on Twitter. And Rhonda, I'm going to bring you in here to address this tweet because Jag says one thing is that he's very transparent. He speaks for the better Philippines. That's why the majority believes in him, our true leader. Rhonda, can you relate to the transparency being an issue that really resonates with people?
That's right. President Duterte speaks his mind, whether it's with crass language or with diplomacy. And so he's been very true to what he said he would do. He's made a very clear departure from politics as usual in the Philippines. Some of the main things being that he's actually resumed peace talks with the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, the longest running Philippine revolution, revolutionary movement since 1968. And that was something that previous presidents did not do in earnest or with any kind of genuine intention. And so people are hopeful that this could actually bring some lasting peace in the country. Some of the other things that he's done, and this is, really resonating with people, Filipino Americans, of which there's about 4 million in this country, is that he is talking about an independent foreign policy, a policy for the Philippines that puts the Filipino people's interests first. And that even includes a break with U.S. military, which has caused so much destruction, environmental destruction, violence against women, and kind of the
And Rhonda, if I can interrupt here for a second.
stain on Philippine sovereignty for so many years. So people are very much encouraged by this departure from status quo.
And Rhonda, with you being in the U.S., being Filipino as well, what do you think about the fact that Duterte is steering away from this long-time alliance with the U.S.? The U.S. has given $400 million in aid every year to the Philippines. It has been a big brother in some ways. Yes, there is some negative history, some tied in with colonialism. But what do you think about this idea that Duterte is striking a more independent foreign policy?
Yeah, it's about time. And that's really the sentiment of, especially amongst younger Filipinos in the United States, is that there is still this colonial relationship, whether it's called a colony or not. There's a colonial relationship between the two. And the aid that has been brought in has been so militarized. A couple of years ago, we had Typhoon Haiyan, which struck the Philippines. And instead of just sending in aid like other countries did, the U.S. sent in helicopters and hundreds and thousands of U.S. troops to deliver this aid and actually militarized communities in the Visayas. And so, that's not the kind of aid that really helps the country. That's the kind of aid that terrorizes communities or, the type of dependence that the U.S. would like to ensure between the Philippines and its former, colonial master.
Well, I'm just going to give people a little bit of background about you, because you're part of a USA alliance of 20 progressive Filipino groups, so people understand where you're coming from, the context of what you're saying. There's a part in your film, Steve, where Duterte talks about the US, his view of the US. Have a look. You can decide for yourself what you think of it.
So it really sounds like you don't want America in the Philippines.
Yes, I believe they should be out. Because of their bullying. Some people say that I have to be very careful about the CIA. And I tell them that, well, if it's my time, it's my time. But somebody has to stand up against them and say, you know, don't with me. Don't with me.
Is that foreign policy? Is he serious, or was he just messing with you?
I think he is pretty serious. I think he has had a long time disdain of the U.S. He comes from the South that has a long history where America did, murder a lot of civilians years ago. And I think that he believes that the U.S. have acted as colonialists. But at the same time, in more recent history, yes, they have militarized certain areas of the Philippines, but they are also working really hard to defend the Philippines, especially on the South China Sea issue. We have China on the doorstep saying, South China Sea is ours. Yes, Philippines, you have claimed this part of it, but no, it's ours. And Duterte has said, hey, you know what, I want to talk with China. But a lot of other countries say there really isn't any talking with China. China's just going to claim because it's a rising superpower and it will take what they see as theirs. So I think it's a dangerous sort of line that Duterte is playing, saying, I want to sort of, get close to China. I don't need my friends anymore. And we pushed him a lot on that, but he seems to believe that, the Philippines is strong enough without an ally like the U.S.
And when we talk about foreign policy,
yeah.
Aries, when we talk about foreign policy, one of the things that keeps coming up online is what the relationship will be like going forward with the United States, especially in the wake of the election of Donald Trump. So here's just one view I want to share with you. This is Rachel. She says she sees this as worrying, how many other parallels we might start to see that tend to beget the rise of populist powers. And she's linking what happened in the Philippines with the election of Duterte, with the election of Trump. Another person also links that, and I want you to tell me whether you think that's fair or not. This is a video comment we got from Richard. Here's what he told us.
Donald Trump and Rodrigo Duterte do not see themselves as usual politicians, or not also as just your everyday populist or anti-establishment demagogue. They see themselves as the leader of a movement that will rid their specific countries of unwanted elements.
So, Aries, is this link between the two leaders, a potential leader and a leader right now? Is that fair?
Well, it's the comparison is stark, and the so-called rise of populists. Let's just backtrack a bit. Latin America have seen these kinds of leaders with Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales and the Kirchners. But let me just say that what's the anxiety should be is that a lot of these leaders, whether it's Trump or Duterte, seems to concentrate on the personality and the one-person political dynamo or machine that they are trying to portray themselves. And by being anti-institutions, they don't really nurture or create new ones that might tap into the collective sentiments of the people. They try to portray themselves as knowing what the people wanted, but at the same time, it's very troubling if democracy becomes the monopoly of just one voice, whether that leader is so charismatic or so popular. But how to tap that popularity and that collective sentiment into something that people could participate, that people could join, so that politics becomes less about one person, but more so as a collective endeavor.
See, Aries, let me share with you a headline. You kind of preempted this US election, Steve, because you wrote back in April, Rodrigo Duterte, the Donald Trump of the Philippines. That seemed a little far-fetched at the time, perhaps, but now, what do you say?
Well, here we have two presidents that shoot from the hip,
right?
That have made lewd comments, towards women. But their unconventional ways, their promises of challenging the system, as Aries said, are very similar. They have a similar style. They believe in a strongman style rule, and they want to tear apart a lot of the ways that things have been done in terms of politics in their respective countries. Where they do differ, though, however, is the very fact that Rodrigo Duterte comes with more than 20 years of political experience as a mayor of a city. He was a legal prosecutor before. Trump himself is a billionaire, property tycoon with zero political experience. So, there are stark differences, and I'd say that Duterte's political approach is more of a socialist approach, whereas Trump may be, more towards, a capitalist approach. So we're going to see distinct differences, and that may also mean that America and the Philippines might rub against each other. And I don't know what you guys think, Aries or Rhonda, but
I don't. Let me just chip in before Rhonda does. In terms of Philippine-U.S. relations, it's a very complicated relationship. When we try to explain it to outsiders, that there is this love and hate relationship going on in the Philippines for many years. The Filipinos love the U.S. They love Americans. Global public opinion says that Filipinos love Americans more than Americans love America. But at the same time, Rodrigo Duterte talks about these episodes of colonial atrocities and of the past, and of the U.S. taking for granted their longtime ally in Asia. And Rodrigo Duterte is coming from the idea that for the past several years, it seemed that it's U.S. national interest that gets to be served in terms of Philippine foreign policy rather than Filipino national interest. But does that mean totally abandoning the U.S. in order to be more subservient or to cater more to the interests of China? So by embracing a newer power and then criticizing the old one, I don't think that's independent foreign policy. So we might need to.
We would have to really
we
guard
might need to
against
talk
that.
about. Yeah, right. We might need to talk about
So
really
Aris,
what independent foreign
hold
policy
tight,
is.
hold tight for a moment. Rhonda, what were you saying there?
Right, that there needs to be a true independent foreign policy, and we're not talking about trading one power for another, or trading the United States for then a new, colonial master per se with China. And I think that what Duterte has done is actually quite smart. He's been diplomatic. He's opened that door to talking with China, and he's not going to be depending on the United States or United States military for that defense. Because really, when you look at the way the United States has, these 800 to 1,000 bases around the world, the way it has militarized many different countries around the world, U.S. military presence doesn't bring stability. It doesn't bring peace and diplomacy. What it does is aggravate situations, intensify tensions, and which is what it has done over the past several years with the increase in military in the Philippines.
I would perhaps step in here a little bit and say, yes, the U.S. is responsible for destabilizing a lot of the regions, but some would argue in China, in Asia, for example, with the support of Japan and others, they have somewhat, stabilized the region for a long time. It's been 70+ years since we've had World War II. Overall, it's relatively stable because of that, power dynamics that the U.S. has played a large part in. And I think the question is, is Duterte playing a very dangerous game? He went to China, said, hello, I want to be friends. I'm willing to talk with you. Please give us lots of aid. And he got a lot of aid, plus a lot of, business deals. Then, a few days later, he went to Japan and said, hey, you're a U.S. ally. Give us lots of aid. And he got lots of aid. And at some point, you sort of figure, if someone pushes the Philippines and says, okay, you know what? We're calling in all the favors that you've asked for. Will he have somebody, an ally, big enough to be behind the Philippines? What do you guys think about that?
Well, I want to jump in here.
Well,
because
we don't
our
want to get caught
community-
between two bullies.
So I want to jump
playing
in
in
because our
Southeast
community
Asia.
seems to think that ally will still be the U.S., but it's conditional. So this is Noel who says, of course, we can maintain friendly ties with the U.S., but there are limits to U.S., what he says, intervention in our affairs. He goes on, Noel says, it's best if the U.S. stops their meddling with our human rights cases. Their standards are much different from ours. So, Aries, I'll give this one to you since you're in the Philippines, or you are from the Philippines. Noel says standards in the Philippines are different from U.S. standards. I'm going to venture to say he's talking about the drug war, the extrajudicial killings that we've covered here on the stream. You were a part of that show. What do you make of this tweet?
Well, this idea of the human rights standards are inapplicable. This is a real debate in a lot of developing countries, whether human rights standards could be imposed on countries that are still trying to develop or trying to put food on the table for their families. I think in terms of criticism, this is where Rodrigo Duterte becomes so defensive, to the point that there's no conversation on how to improve human rights conditions by totally throwing the human rights discourse on its head.
So, Aries, I'm really intrigued by what Steve has to say here, because you spent time with him and you asked him about encouraging vigilantes. There's a little clip I'm going to play first, and you can tell us what he thought about that. Have a listen to this.
If I was the father, then you rape my daughter and you kill them. Would you think I will wait? Would you think my anger can wait justice? Of course not. I will kill you.
But even just by saying that, you're encouraging vigilantism.
Yes, I am encouraging. So what's wrong now?
So the context here is that Duterte was trying to make a point that the justice system in the Philippines is broken. You arrest a criminal for raping, say, a daughter, and that person might languish in prison for 5 to 7 years with no resolution to the court case, and then he or she might be let go. So he said, you know what? With that in mind, if someone raped my daughter, I would take a gun and shoot him dead. Is he encouraging vigilante justice? He said it right there. Yes, he is. And that goes then to the war on drugs. Is he encouraging people to go out on the streets and shoot down suspected drug dealers? And he didn't deny that. He would encourage that. He says that he directly hasn't killed anybody, but he wouldn't hold anybody else back from that. And that's an interesting point. I think there needs to be a healthy debate as to whether this is the type of justice that's needed in the Philippines. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. On the streets, a lot of people are saying, things are safer now. There's fear among drug dealers, there's fear among criminals that if they do something wrong, they will be gunned down. And perhaps, like Aries, you were saying, in a developing country, perhaps you need this kind of fear to bring peace, stability, and safety to the streets.
Steve, there's a question here,
really
though.
Dangerous.
And I hear that danger there, but there's a question here that kind of picks up on what you're saying there, Rhonda. This is Kay Stewart, who says, in September, the government declared the drug war a success. Now we're told the government might still need to declare martial law. They go on to say, so which is which? Or has the problem been revealed to be far larger than first imagined? Steve, do you have insight on that?
When Duterte was campaigning, he said and promised that within 3 to 6 months of becoming president, he would wipe out drugs and criminality in the country. When we came to him, 3 months had already passed, and I said, are you still going to keep to this promise? And he said, well, you know what? I never knew as mayor the magnitude of the problem. He says, I didn't know there were an estimated 4 million drug users, he said in his own, those are his words. And so, he goes, I will keep on going in this campaign. So he's already, broken one promise per se. But yeah, I think hard questions need to be asked about his actions, and whether he will, move towards martial law. He has said to us in the past that's not his intention. He doesn't want to go there. But we've seen him, declare, state of emergency, these sort of things, and there is a fear that, he would move it further. We asked him, do you plan to be a dictator? Are you trying to dismantle democracy in the country? And he said, you know what? I have no desire to be a dictator. I'm 71 years of age. All I want to do is to make the Philippines a better country.
Everybody, have a look at my laptop here, because the 101 East film is coming up in a couple of hours. Rodrigo Duterte, the president's report card. What did you learn about him that you didn't know already?
The most compelling thing, I think, is this vigilante aspect.
Sure.
I believe that Duterte sees himself as a superhero. Yeah. Perhaps like, Batman or somebody trying to bring justice outside the system in his way.
All right, he's Steve Chow, he's from 101 East. Thank you for being part of this program. And Aries and Rhonda and the community, we are taking everybody online to the online post show at stream.aljazeera.com. And next week,
we will be back in our regular studios in Washington, D.C. That's it from us from Doha.
So this has been a Ben Bowden production. Thank you to everybody in Doha for being wonderful hosts. We've really enjoyed being here at the Al Jazeera headquarters. See you online. Take care. Hello again. We're on our online post show at stream.aljazeera.com. You already know that because that is where you are. Steve, when there was a night. I don't want to give too much away. There was a night where you just encountered a lot of deaths, a lot of bodies. What is that like to continue filming? How does that influence how the final film ends up and how you approach the main subject of the film?
Well, on one night in Manila, we came across 4 killings.
Yeah.
Suspected drug dealers that were gunned down either by masked gunmen on motorcycle or by police. And one of the most disturbing incidences was when police arrested one drug suspect, put him in handcuffs, and then not more than 50 feet away from the police station, they shot him. And the police actually, we were waiting at the police station, police took us over there, and we asked him what happened. There was the body lying there in handcuffs. And the police said that this person tried to reach for the gun, of a police officer, and so they shot him dead.
Sure.
And I think it's quite disturbing because we talked to local media who've been covering this for months, and they said they've seen this time and time again, police saying that they acted in self-defense, so therefore they were in their very right, to shoot down a drug suspect. But I think serious questions need to be asked whether extrajudicial killings are taking place, and if Duterte is somewhat sanctioning it. And if he is, then, and if it's bringing a certain degree of justice to the Philippines, maybe he should just come clean and say, this is what I'm doing. But, it's making the country better.
We've heard those same questions from international leaders. We've also heard them from the UN, but not everyone online necessarily thinks it's a bad thing. I want to raise a question that one member of our community raised. This is Charlie. He sent us a video comment talking about results. Have a listen to what he told the stream.
Since this election, Duterte has made good on his campaign pledge to gun down suspected drug dealers in the street. A war on drugs which has cost more than 3,000 lives so far. It remains to be seen whether President Trump will similarly make good on his more contentious campaign pledges.
So Rhonda, he links it back there to Donald Trump and seeing what's going to happen. But his point is this was a campaign pledge from Duterte and it's being filled. What do you make of that? Well,
the war on drugs will fail if it takes this continued military, hardline police approach. The war on drugs in the U.S. just succeeded in criminalizing a population of African Americans in the U.S. It would be doing the same thing. It would be criminalizing people. It's already criminalizing people, and the extrajudicial killings are unacceptable. What he needs to do is really focus on the fundamental, root of the problem, which is the poverty in the country, which is the reason the drug trade is flourishing in the first place. And so if he can actually get to fundamental reforms of the economy and creating jobs and creating, a stable economy, that is really the long-term solution to any kind of problem with drugs and drug trade.
What kind of relation? Yeah, go ahead, Aries.
Yes, right. Let me just say that wars on drugs have always been popular throughout the world. We've seen this in Colombia and Mexico, and even in Thailand, the beginning of Thaksin's prime ministership. It's popular because the results could be seen, whether they're dead bodies, whether there's the peace on the streets. But again, just like I'm agreeing with Rhonda in saying that not only is it an economic issue, it's a public health issue. And I think the efforts of the Duterte government more to focus on rehabilitation, but also trying to and join other actors to get involved is the positive step. However, I just don't feel I'm very anxious about the complicity with regard to the killings. Rodrigo Duterte needs to show the consistent resolve in trying to gun down drug lords, the same resolve in trying to investigate all these summary executions, and whether there's been problems about implementing the terms of engagement every time police operations are happening in communities where there are drug lords or there are drug pushers.
Aries, Duterte has been very clear saying it's not his job to investigate, allegations of extrajudicial killings. That's up to the courts to do this. His job is to strike fear into the hearts of drug dealers. And he says he believes in the Machiavellian way to a certain degree, which is strike fear among the populace, and therefore you enact change fast. And yes, Rhonda, like you were saying, he says he does recognize that you do need to bring in education to help the poorer, communities. But at the same time, he says when the situation is so severe, you need to strike hard and strike fast so that you can bring the space in order to make the other changes. Otherwise, nothing will happen. And, you sort of understand his approach, but at the same time, there are serious concerns whether, he's throwing out all the treaties the Philippines has signed, with the UN, the agreement saying, that the Philippines will respect human rights and will not, commit extrajudicial killings. But, perhaps, in Duterte's world, that's the best solution.
Did you like him?
He's a very likable, charismatic man. And when he says that he really is doing this for the country, for Filipinos, you tend to believe him. One of the great things about the Philippines is that it does have a healthy, robust media. Yes, they might be too critical at times and one-sided and one-focused, but at the same time, a lot of people have investigated him, trying to find dirt on him in terms of whether he's corrupt, whether he's been hoarding money, like perhaps some other corrupt politicians, but they haven't found very much on him. So then one goes to say, okay, you know what? If you look at his track record in Davao, the city where he was mayor for 20 years, and he's done a lot to clean that city up, perhaps all the things he's saying, he might be able to accomplish for the greater Philippines. And I think this is why, we're hearing from Aries and Rhonda about, how supportive they are in some degree, for Duterte. And, he's so popular around the country.
What I noted was how serious this conversation is, because often when he pops up in the press, he's a meme, he's a living meme.
Very much so.
I have to show something. The 101 East team shared this. They tweeted this out. I'm just going to show it to you in close-up, so have a look here. There's something mischievous about his face and knowing about what he's doing. Did you get that sense about when he was saying stuff, he knew exactly the reaction that was going to happen?
Very much so.
Right.
People say that he shoots off the hip.
Yeah.
But at the same time, every time he swears,
Yeah.
every time he makes a very controversial statement, in this case, he stared at our camera when he started saying,
He's looking,
when he's swearing at America.
Have another look, because you can see it. He turns around and eyes flick up. There you go.
And he starts swearing, going, bring it on, America, bring it on, I'm not afraid of you. And that's his statement. He's saying, hey, we Filipinos are too tired of being, subservient, if you will, to America, to others. We want to be proud of who we are. We're going to set our own agenda. And I think that really resonates with Filipinos. They're feeling, hey, you know what? We need to be proud of ourselves. And that's sort of what, Rodrigo Duterte stands for.
It's interesting because it's not just Filipinos. This is a tweet we got. I'll just read two to end here from our community. But Peterson says, I like his unpredictability. He goes on to say he speaks his mind and not from a script like every president has to. On the other hand, though, this one's a little bit harsher. This is someone else who doesn't quite agree. This is Harper, who says he's popular to his supporters, but to the thinking Filipinos, Harper says, he's a human rights violator, cynical, and a dictator.
I'm just intrigued by the big picture, because we're about to wrap up, but people are drawing connections between Trump, Duterte, and populism. Do you think they are the right people at the right time, where different communities are feeling like we don't want to go with the establishment? Or do you think that's too big a leap to make?
Not at all. I think that in Asia even, we've seen sort of this whole mood. We've seen Modi come in India. We've seen, Joko in Indonesia take over. This sort of rise in popularism, this rise in nationalism, this belief that, globalism is not necessarily working for me or my country.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're seeing this widening income gap all around the world. And these, leaders are saying, hey, you know what? We speak for the people. We're going to represent you, and we're going to be real in the eyes of the people, whatever that means.
And that's probably the clearest difference between Trump and Duterte, which is Trump has always represented his own self-interest and the interests of the billionaires and millionaires in the United States, whereas Duterte is really trying to stand up for the Philippines as a nation, for the poor Filipino on the ground. He doesn't come from the silver spoon that Trump does. And so I think, at this time of the rising populism, someone like Trump is very dangerous, because he's doing, catering to the true, genuine interests and needs and, problems of the working class and poor people in America, but he's driving it with racist and xenophobia talk and, for the interests of the class that he represents.
Rhonda and Aries, what are you doing at 22:30 GMT on November the 17th? What plans do you have? May I
I think I'll be watching Steve Chow's movie.
Oh, right answer.
same here, same
Yes, yes. AlJazeera.com. We are streaming. We're streaming in America. We're streaming all over the world. It is free. How would you describe your film? How happy were you with it, Steve?
I'd say I think it's a very honest look
Right.
at Rodrigo Duterte, and he really opened the doors to us.
Right.
So, you know, I hope the public enjoys it and learns something more about this interesting, colorful leader.
And when it's over, do you think those doors will still be open?
I'm not too sure about that. And, you know, even if he is a little bit upset, that means that we've done our job as journalists.
All right, this is it. Goodbye, Doha. Goodbye, Eris and Rhonda and Steve Chow for now. Thank you so much for staying with us all through this week for special programs from Doha at the Al Jazeera headquarters. Malika Bilal.
We will see everyone back in Washington, D.C. And of course, we'll see you online.
Inshallah.